part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane.
This is Jason J. Lewis, the voice of Superman on Justice League Action.
This is Mark Wade, writer of Superman Birthright.
You're listening to the Krypton Report.
Welcome to the next installment of Flash Weeks. I am your host, Tyler, the Superman of Blue, and I guess this episode of Flash Weeks is pretty dope because I actually have with me my usual co-host, Mr. James, Man of Steel, the Superman of Red, which very fitting. Cole, what's up, buddy?
What's up? How's it going, Tyler?
I'm good. Well, normally on Flash Week episodes, I would ask our co-host how excited they are for the Flash. But since you and I talk about it like every episode we talk general, I'm not going to ask you because that would be ridiculous because we talk about it regularly. But hey,
we talk regularly on the podcast and off.
Yeah, exactly. So on this week's episode, we are looking at Flashpoint, and we're looking at the book, just kind of the story in general, the book and the film version, and I'll throw in a little bit tidbits because of season 3 of the Flash TV series kind of used Flashpoint a little. Excuse me, my throat's really dry and Gina's getting me some tea.
Twisted tea?
Yeah. We did more of a hard discussion on this film back about 2 years ago? 3? Was it in 2020?
When
we did the whole connective universe when it ended with Apocalypse War, I think it was in 2020.
Dang, is that how long ago Apocalypse War came out? It has been a couple of years now.
I'm pretty sure it's 2020. Yeah,
sounds about right.
So because we started with this film and reviewed from this film to Apocalypse War, and then later we kind of threw in and talked about Constantine, House of Mysteries, because it kind of capped it all together. So we don't have to go into huge depth about the film in itself because we've already done that, but we're just kind of talking about this story because it is such a pivotal Flash story. And we can tell that the film in itself, the Flash, the movie, is taking from this. You know, at one point, the Ezra Miller Flash-led film, people called it Flashpoint. And they never said that. They just said the Flash movie. But fans just started calling it Flashpoint. And I'm happy that it's not... Excuse me. Excuse Tom. That's a Blink-182 reference for anybody that listens to the live Blink-182 CD. I'm glad that the Flash film is not a literal interpretation of the Flashpoint story, but the base idea is there. Because I really would not want to see Flashpoint as a film. It's almost like just watching the nightmare stuff from what we had gotten in previous films.
Yeah, I mean, if we got a proper Flashpoint, if things had kind of gone the right way and we got a proper Flashpoint, I definitely would have liked to see more of an adaptation because that would be spectacular to watch them all kind of round out and kill each other and all that type of stuff. And then if they wanted to reboot after that, they could have. That would have been kind of an epic conclusion for the cast and characters that we, most of us have come to love.
It would have been something. But I mean, this story is dark. And so we'll start here and just kind of talk about... I'm dying. I'm dying here. I need some Flashpoint myself. Reset the universe. We'll start here and talk about the comic a little bit here. The Flashpoint comic ran from May to August of 2011. Now, I was looking up. I remember being at my local comic shop at the time. It was a crappy comic shop. And the guy's like, yeah, this Flashpoint story's coming, and it's going to reset everything for DC. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, man, they're going to take it all back to 1. And I'm like, okay. He's like, do you want the book? And I was like, okay. And I think I got the first 2 issues. And then we ended up moving, and the comic shop didn't have it where we were. So I didn't get to read it till it was complete, and I read it in trade. But you kind of knew the story enough, because it is definitely the book you need to read before, because we all know that Flashpoint was the last stories of it's not even continuity. I mean, it is, but it's like this Elseworld in continuity story before the New 52.
Yeah, Flashpoint is an alternate timeline story. It's not like Elseworlds or anything. Like, Barry changed and broke the entire timeline. So it was the catalyst for the birth of the New 52. And honestly, so I've talked about it before. My history with Flashpoint is that before Flashpoint, I really only grabbed, comics. I didn't follow the stories down the line. I grabbed some trades. You know what I mean? It was random stuff from everywhere. And then when Flashpoint came around, I didn't read Flashpoint itself when it had come out. But once it was done and the New 52 started, I read Flashpoint, and I kind of jumped in on the New 52. Is kind of where I started keeping up with like more of the continuity and everything.
Yep, same.
So like I've read them. I've read stories forever, but
I usually caught up in trade or here and there, because
it wasn't even catching up. It was just like some stories I'd heard of, things like that,
Well, one thing that helped
random issues
was my local library started getting individual comics for the different titles every month, and you could check out the individual issues. So that's helped with the New 52s. They started right then, so I could read every title, and then of course got the trades. And the New 52 was written for the trade style, and that was one thing I actually really liked about it. They wrote it in volumes and everything. So, you should really read Flashpoint before kicking off, because the final pages in Flashpoint is the New 52 art style when Barry comes back.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep, the Jim Lee characters that kind of kicked off the New 52.
And what's interesting is I only read a little bit of. You have the 5-issue storyline that's just Barry Allen. And then you go into, you have 1-issue, one-offs and stuff like that. And then I think Thomas Wayne's was a couple issues. There's a couple like collected of all the tie-in issues. And it was interesting. And I read all of them. I think the only one I bought at the time was Green Arrow, and it was okay. And we'll talk about it here in a minute. I did read this Project Superman issues again for this conversation. But I will say,
you know what? I've been looking for that trade. So like I have Flashpoint, and I have a couple of the Flashpoint World books.
Mm-hmm.
The Superman one is one that I don't think I ever found physical when I was looking at like the comic shop or the bookstore. It was always like the same ones, like Batman and Reverse Flash. I think they even had the Green Lantern at the comic store. So I had actually never read the Project Superman book, or the Superman led Flashpoint book.
Yeah.
And all those tie-ins. And and I had seen it when I had finished. I was looking and I was like, oh man, there's some more here, like that I haven't read a Flashpoint, because I was enjoying the rather brutal world that they were writing about with all the tie-ins.
It is a brutal world. Now, in the book, famous. I mean, the Flashpoint became like an instant classic. And I say, that the Flashpoint book works really well as a secondary, like, to Jeff Johns' Rebirth. Like, if you read Flash Rebirth and then read Flashpoint, they work very well together. I mean, there's some other stories that were in there between, but there's some build up with Thawne in a one issue that kind of where it shows that Thawne rewrites his own history. That helps, but there's stuff in. I feel like there's little subtle things from Rebirth that they pulled into the film Flashpoint that weren't in the Flashpoint book, and we'll get there in a minute. But
oh, okay. I'd like to hear what you got to say there. There are different things that I like that they did in the movie versus the book, and things I like the way it turned out in the book. I like the way the story developed there, but with the things they changed for the movie to give you the big third act battle, that's there's some changes there that I think worked well for the movie.
So the base story of Flashpoint is Barry Allen wakes up, and he wakes up at his desk, and he goes to run out because he hears something, and he runs into his mom. And this world has no Flash, and as the story progresses, Barry sees that the world is not the same as he remembers, and something both the film and the book, but the book does at least one thing better, is Barry's whole thing about his mom being alive, but he doesn't spend any time with his mom. In the book, there's one scene where he's running back in time. He stops and sees his mom before he continues to go backwards. Now, that was nice. In the film, that's not present. But I always thought that was interesting that the whole premise was he had to go back and save his mom, but yet he didn't spend any time in the story with his mom. But in doing so, and Thawne explains it as by traveling backwards in time, because he says he's never been to the past before. It's always to the future and back. It caused ripples through time that just caused things to change. And subtle things like echoes, and the idea is it didn't just change, when Barry saved his mom, like so much other things changed, even things that happened beforehand. One being, of course, the Kent Superman crash landing in Metropolis and not, the landing with the Kents. And then the big one being that it's Bruce Wayne that's killed that night in the alley, and Thomas Wayne becomes this very Punisher-esque Batman, and his mom, Martha, snaps and becomes the Joker. And that's some deep, deep stuff. So the story is Barry goes through, he realizes Thomas Wayne is Batman, and he tries to get his speed back, and he thinks it's Thawne. The whole thing, he thinks Thawne did something. Thawne created this world. He can't go back in time because of Thawne, and come to find out, Barry did it. Barry's responsible for this because he wanted to save his mom. And it's very interesting.
It is. It's very interesting. In the book, they go very much more into the fact that Thawne is able to go back and change things without damaging the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Barry tried to do something good, something nice, and he ultimately like fractured the timeline.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a very, very well done piece of irony,
It is very ironic in the scene where Thawne is like punching him, they're fighting, and he's like, you didn't go back to stop Hitler. You didn't go back to stop this. You just went back to save your mom, and look what happened.
Yeah. Right. So, it's a very well written book. It's a very well written movie. It's really great. So like some of the things in the book that are good, that are cool and interesting, is the fact that obviously there's the warring factions of the Amazons versus the Atlanteans. And in war and stuff, there are like spies and people who are infiltrating and everything like that. And the fact that Enchantress is feeding the Amazons information, she turns out. And in the end, she really doesn't care who she's fighting. She just wants to cause the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So that was her way of doing so. They took that out of the movie.
Element
and
Girl.
The Element Girl thing. And it actually allowed for Superman to come back, and rescue Cyborg, his hero and his friend, the person who rescued him. And it was, I feel, is a little more impactful than Superman just kind of disappearing.
Yeah, it is. I will say this. I'll ask you this question right now. Which version do you like better, the movie or the book?
I mean, as a piece on its own, I think I like the movie better.
I agree.
And it's not putting down the book in any way, because if I want to read it, I'll absolutely read it. If I want to watch it, I'll watch it. It'll take about the same amount of time.
I think because one thing is, and we're talking about the story in general here, is the film finds a way to take nods at the story as a whole. So there, we see what happened with Hal. There's little things with like Deathstroke, Grifter, that weren't in the just 5-issue Flashpoint. So they find a way to really touch on the universe as a whole and kind of give you an idea of what these characters have been through. So here's a quick history with the film. Justice League: The Flashpoint Paradox, the animated film, was released July 30th of 2013. So it is basically this year's the 10-year anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting, right? I bought the DVD at a used video store. I remember I went to rent it, and they already had like a used copy on the shelf, because this came out like shortly after we had moved, and I just ended up buying it because that's when I really started collecting all the films. It was released only 2 months after Superman Unbound, which was May 7th of 2013, which is interesting because usually these movies were more spread out. Now, how do you feel about the animation style of the film?
So there's some of the animation that I find appalling. Just because it's bad, it's weird. Like it's not symmetrical. It's not,
it's kind of
like Superman and Aquaman are like tall and elongated and huge and blocky. It's just,
yeah,
they're built weird. Their necks are bigger than their head.
Yeah.
So yeah, some of the art is, but those are also like honestly peripheral characters because like Barry's is great. And you know what? I just said this when I was watching it earlier. The Flash running in this movie is my favorite Flash running. Favorite animated Flash running, favorite live action Flash running. For whatever reason, because there always is some sort of disconnect with the world around him when he's moving. The only time I feel in live action that they kind of nail it, and they might have done it in other versions, but it's how they kind of did it on Smallville, where everything slowed down and and Clark ran in, and you know what I mean? And it's the same sort of effect that they used for the introduction of the Flash in Zack Snyder's Justice League when the truck crashed. When Iris and the truck crashed, there usually feels like a disconnect of either the speed of the world or how he is like interacting with the world. Like, is he even touching the ground when he's running? Maybe he looks like he's running at a decent pace, but it's like the world is like shoo, like going by way too fast, but it doesn't look like he's running as fast as like the world is passing by him. You know, it's that disconnect of that speed and time. And I think they did a fantastic job in this one. And I'm sure it has something to do with animation, but the way that they run, their movements and the streaks, the colored streaks, and just their movements and the way they actually make what appears to be connection with the world around them when they're running on the ground and up walls and all that type of up and down walls and stuff. You know, like, yeah, it's one of my favorite just watching it.
That's awesome.
So art wise, I mean, yeah, there's some fantastic moments in it, but also there's some really like, you know where they spent their time.
Yeah. What I find interesting is this movie does tee up the New 52, which is the New 52 films, like the animated
Justice League War, Throne of Atlantis, Teen Titans versus Justice League, Judas Contract, all the way through Dark and Dark Apocalypse War.
So what's interesting is the film ends where the characters have a New 52 look to them, but it's not the same look that would appear in the films. You know, this film even has a post-credit scene of the invading
Boom Tube and Parademons.
Yeah, and I thought that was just interesting that it didn't, because Justice League War was released January 21st, 2014 on digital, and then February 4th on physical. So it's only like...
You guys remember when they used to push digital before physical?
Now they just were like, here.
Now it's like, take it all. Like, give us money.
Well, I mean, there for a while, there was like digital, then physical, then streaming. Then it became all on the same day. You could stream it on DC Universe, I think it was on DC Universe for a while. And then they kind of put it, like, separated by a month. And then once it went to Max or HBO Max, they spread it out more. But now it's like you get physical and digital at the same time. But I just think it's interesting because none of the voice cast in this is the voice cast that would appear in those following film series either.
No, the people who actually appear in this is well, you know what? I take that back because Nathan Fillion does come back as Green Lantern.
I was about to say that too.
He's classic.
What's so interesting is him. So we do Justice League War, and then, which is the kickoff of the film series. But what's crazy is Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, and Superman are all replaced after that film. And then the replacements carry the rest of the
Superman
series.
Superman, I'm sorry, and I love Alan Tudyk, but is an upgrade from Alan Tudyk to Jerry O'Connell. Alan Tudyk, I think, did much better as Green Arrow.
Yes.
And among others, because he's multi-talented, but I don't know what direction Monahan was given, but they lost that with or they took that away with Rosario Dawson, and it was an improvement.
Yeah. So, but at the time, I remember like this is when 10 years ago I was really getting active on Twitter, and I actually tweeted and chatted with the director Jay Oliva, and I was just like complimenting him on such a great job with the Flashpoint paradox, because as dark as the film is, and I feel like it's weird that this one's only rated PG-13 and not rated R. It's a great adaptation. Like it's like I said, I prefer it over the book, which usually doesn't happen. But things I like in the film is, I like. How do you feel about the cosmic treadmill? Because it's like a love-hate thing I have for it. But he uses the treadmill in the book to travel back in time, but in this he doesn't need the treadmill in the film.
So I mean, yeah, is it the easy way out? Maybe they do in the book. He does say he used the treadmill to focus where he was going, and that's what it's used for, is to be able to focus, like where you're going in the time stream.
Hey, pause. I gotta pause real quick. I gotta go help Sayla.
Okay.
I'll be right back. And I caught a couple other things of note here that I found interesting. Is let's see, the movie makes no mention or no note at all of Henry Allen. Now the book shows a scene of Henry Allen, and quickly, but there's no mention of Henry in the Flashpoint film.
There is not.
They make Barry's mom to be very like a single parent, and it's in the Jeff Johns Rebirth that Thawne basically confesses to Barry that he killed his mom, and that it's always been him that's caused problems for Barry.
Okay.
There's hints at this in the film, but that's why I say it works really cool, them together. Of course, the book doesn't have like an opening scene with the Justice League like the Flashpoint movie does, but I feel like the only thing about the Flashpoint movie, by having that kind of cold opening with the Justice League, there's not kind of this inciting event of why at that moment he would go back and change and save his mom. Let's see. In the film, more characters are murdered before Barry goes back in time. And I think that gives just more gravity to how horrible this timeline, this world is.
Well, I mean, in the movie, they had so many characters, characters that may have shown up in like the other tie-in stories and everything. But, I mean, they had Clayface, they had Tempest, they had Aqualad, they had Calder, they had Deathstroke was in the book for a short minute. Lex Luthor was there.
Yeah. No, I do think it's interesting that the Flash's costume in the film is a very Wally West costume. Like his symbol is the Wally West symbol. Brian and I had a whole discussion that you'll hear on the next episode of Flash Week about the differences between what is Barry's costume and what is Wally's, and how a lot of times when they change mediums, they rip off and amalgamize.
Right.
Now, one thing that I like, okay, so in the film,
something about, when we started back up might be jarring when I was talking and you're just like, boom. Anyways, I'm sorry. I was just thinking about it.
Yep. Long pause. I watched this with.
It's okay. I didn't even remember what I was talking about. I tried to hold it, but it slipped away.
You're like, and his name was okay. Tyler, where'd you go? I watched this film with Solomon and Selah, and I forgot how dark it was at times. Like, dang. But I was trying to give them just kind of an idea of how things are going to work, because the Flashpoint story is prevalent, but what I was going to say is, in the film, Batman shoots Thawne in the head with a gun. And I'm pretty sure it's the same gun that killed Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. It's something I loved in the movie, because in the book, he stabs him through with a sword.
Yeah. And that's where I feel like the movie improves upon the story.
Yeah. In the movie, he actually breaks the jar, that display case with the gun inside of it, which is the gun that killed Bruce. I don't feel like it could be any other gun. It's kind of, I mean, Batman has it on display like that in other stories. The gun that killed his parents.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's obviously what it is. And yeah, he breaks that case open and takes the gun with him. And yeah, I have no doubt that's the gun he used to put that bullet through Thawne's head.
That's what I thought too.
He disappears on Barry, and then the next time you see him is through that bullet wound, straight through Thawne's forehead.
Which is great, because that same thing pulls into another film, which helps tie this into that new continuity of DC films. Now, the one thing is, we'll talk about the final scene, is when Barry, in both the film, I think in the film it works great because it's Kevin Conroy voicing Batman. But it's the scene where Barry arrives and presents Bruce with a letter written by his father. And Bruce immediately notices his father's handwriting. And I'm glad that we don't know what it says. I think it makes it much more powerful. And then Bruce sheds a tear and just looks at Barry and is like, "You are one hell of a messenger."
Yeah, it's a strong emotional scene.
It is, and
delivered beautifully by Kevin Conroy.
Not one that can be replicated in the Flash upcoming film, because we're dealing with two versions of Bruce, not Thomas. But
yes,
one thing about the film is, we have kind of mentioned and hypothesized, is the Supergirl storyline is going to be similar to the Project Superman of the Flashpoint universe. Now, basically, the Project Superman is, he crash lands. The Kents don't find him. He's not really raised by anybody. He's basically locked away from the sun in a government facility deep underground under red solar radiation. So he never really gets to develop his powers, his sense of anything.
Yeah, he's very scrawny, very little contact with humans, and if he did have much contact, it was not good. He's like malnourished, probably to do with the. Well, I mean, I would assume because Kryptonians lived under a red sun and they were, fine. I imagine it had to do with cruelty because he was an alien.
Cruelty, and I mean,
the reason he was so emaciated.
He's also under red sun filters. It's not natural red sun in the environment. So he's on Earth's environment with red sun filters.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? So it's even more unnatural.
Right.
So we talked about, that's what we feel that they're going to do with the Supergirl storyline.
Yeah, and from more recent looks at that, I mean, you've gotten more glimpses of an emaciated Kara.
Yep.
Her really bony hands, and you can see her ribs and spine and stuff. Yeah.
It's Kara. She says Kara, dude.
Kara.
Because that's now the thing.
It's not Kara anymore.
Kara is from Smallville. Kara is now Supergirl.
Kind of like Lara.
Yeah. or Lana. Hey, Lana. Lana Lang, people.
That was a weird pronunciation, Lana.
I guess it works. I thought about
it. Does.
But
it does. However you would say it. Is it the short A or the long A?
And I just feel like it comes down to, like, once you hear it said out loud certain ways, that's how you take it. And then when someone changes it, like how hard it was when we were watching Supergirl and it was Kara, after always hearing it as Kara.
And sometimes it just comes out of my mouth either way. Like,
yep,
it's not specific.
You just, yeah, I agree totally. I was not a fan of the Project Superman comic books because I felt they tried to give him kind of this story and this person he fought against, and it was written by Scott Snyder, which is kind of crazy because I usually love everything Snyder writes. But I just did not really. I think it could have been just a one shot, and kind of told more from General Lane's perspective of just when it landed, how they treated this creature, and we really got to see the cruelty that was done to him, compared to trying to give him a 3-issue arc and everything. So,
well, for anybody who hasn't read it and all those tie-ins,
it's been 10 years now.
The Flashpoint book. Well, I mean, I'm giving a heads up, not a spoiler warning. A heads up for those tie-ins. They're pretty brutal. I'm pretty sure I recall a story where Ray Palmer is small and somebody bites his head off.
It's like The Boys, man.
It kind of is, yeah.
And it's but I mean, so that's kind of Flashpoint in a nutshell. It's a very Barry Allen driven story with everyone else being a part of it. And it's just, it's probably the biggest Flash story in a long time. That's, very Flash centric.
Yeah, I mean,
and we all know that Jeff John loves the Flash, but I feel like he hasn't written as much Flash as you would think he would have written.
Well, he did. I mean, he did write kind of a seminal run bringing Barry back.
Yeah, but I'm gonna say just the Rebirth book.
Yeah,
and it brought Barry back, and I reread that too. It's a heavy, dense book. Sometimes comics just make things more complicated. They give us this good story, but it's just so overly complicated. They're like, haha, it's comics.
Yeah. We're allowed to drag it out for 50 issues.
And make things so super sciencey you don't even know what's way is up.
Yeah.
But I do want to point out that the Flashpoint idea was used in the television series. Flashpoint was used to kick off the 3rd season. It is a weaker version, but basically the same premise. Kind of. The thing was, Barry, at the end of season 2, Barry's father got out of prison and was shortly murdered by Zoom. So Barry had just lost his father, was just grieving having lost everything. And he's talking to Iris, and Iris basically tells him to go, they're together, to go and do what you need to do. And at the end of season 2, he starts running and runs back in time and stops Thawne. Season 3 picks up with the first episode being Flashpoint. And in Flashpoint, he's not the Flash. He's with his parents. He's still living at home. And they're starting to give him this kind of, hey, are you ever going to move out, son? And he's trying to talk to Iris because him and Iris aren't together. He's got Thawne locked up. But the thing is, Wally's the Flash, but for some reason going by Kid Flash. And Barry starts losing his memories previously, and he starts losing his speed. And then decides, because Wally gets hurt and is dying or whatever, he's going to go back and undo it. And he has to take him and Thawne run back together because he has to take him back so that he can actually do what he came to do, was kill his mom. And it's very interesting. And the main crutch of the Flashpoint story, because then throughout the rest of the series they reference this as Flashpoint in the world, an alternate timeline, and I think they really should have let this storyline be like 3 issues or 3 episodes long, or maybe 4. Like really give like a chunk of time to it, where we start to see other things in the world, like maybe get some guest stars and make it kind of like a mini crossover, like later that they would do like with Armageddon and stuff, to really experience the world of Flashpoint. To even say Flashpoint, it'd be like doing 1 episode and calling it Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they only go to like 2 Earths. You know?
Yeah.
But the heart of the story is saving Nora Allen. That's what it's about. And so no matter what kind of version you're looking at, the film, the book, the TV show, or what will be in the film, that's a word, right?
Yeah.
The live action film movie is saving Nora Allen. But
yeah, I mean, I agree with the television storyline. It was very truncated, very short. They did kind of do a new angle where he had to go back and allow Thawne to do what he had to do. So that is something unique to itself. Instead of like stopping himself or stopping Thawne or stopping whoever it was. But yeah, it was. I do think it should have been a little more widespread. They only referenced Flashpoint like a handful of times with even less characters.
Yeah, because the only reason they keep referencing it is because it's what Savitar uses as his base for.
Well, it was the only real. I'm trying to think. The only real affected characters was Cisco and Diggle.
Yeah, Cisco, Diggle, maybe Caitlin.
Maybe Caitlin, I was thinking.
Joe and Iris a little, because they're not talking, they're not together. Barry and Iris aren't together. But
I mean, yeah, it still fractures like the relationships that were made, that were undone, but the characters who were affected, like their worlds that were changed, was like 2 or 3 characters.
But then you have the fallout of other people who end up getting powers because Savitar and Dr. Alchemy come after them because of the Flashpoint. But that's a whole season 3 thing. You get down that wormhole. But the whole point is Barry had to allow his mom to die because that night of her death became something that could not be changed. And like we said, Barry going to the past is an issue. And I'm very interested to see some of the things that how it's going to play out in the movie. Like,
well, the Speed Force is a pretty essential part of the DC universe. So, I mean, Flash kind of changing the fact that he wouldn't become the Flash would impact that dramatically. So, I mean, I can see why it would be such like a massive story the way it was, the way it was an Armageddon story and
but the thing is,
a reboot.
You have to think there was a timeline where he was the Flash and his mom was alive. That's the thing you have to remember.
Well, it's comics, and of course there was.
Because that's the night that, Flash in the future travels with Thawne to stop him, because Thawne goes back to actually... It's like a very John Connor Terminator thing, There has to be that initial timeline before the loop to get the loop started. But that's Flashpoint. So we will see how Flashpoint plays into the film with the death of Nora Allen, with how he changes it, how the Speed Force works, how the film ends and what's rebooted, what's not, and the future to come. So
yeah, we've seen a lot of elements and pieces that we can see are referenced very, very strongly in the trailers and everything. So yeah, let's find out.
So stay with us for more of Flash Week.
Look up in the sky.
We just want to say if you've enjoyed this podcast, please check out other podcasts on the Press Play Podcast Network. We're going to press pause and hear a few words from our other podcasts on Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us and then listen in.
If you are like Tyler and James and can't get enough super talk, check out these other podcasts. Digging for Kryptonite, Supergirl Radio, The Last Sons of Krypton, the Superboy Legacy Podcast, All-Star Superfans, Superman the Animated Podcast, The Aspiring Kryptonians, Always Hold On to Smallville, The Geek of Steel, and Truth, Justice, and Hope.
Remember to check out Krypton Report on all social media platforms. Go to linktree.com/Krypton Report. You find all of our reports.
This is Dan Jurgens, and if you want to have a good time, keep listening to the Krypton Report.